The December air in North Austin felt ordinary, the kind that makes neon signage glow warmer. Inside the yogurt shop, two teenage employees finished tasks they had repeated all autumn nights. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison checked the register while her co-worker Eliza Thomas stacked clean containers. Jennifer's 15-year-old sister Sarah waited nearby with 13-year-old friend Amy Ayers needing a ride home. A man earlier used the back restroom, lingering longer than customers typically do before leaving quietly. Near closing, a couple departing noticed two men seated, behaving strangely, their heads low, furtive. Jennifer locked routine tasks into muscle memory. Wipe surfaces, zero out the till, set the alarm. Outside, traffic on West Anderson Lane thinned, the strip storefronts shuttering one by one uneventfully. Sometime after closing, violence erupted with chilling efficiency, overpowering 4 girls within a small footprint. The killer or killers controlled victims rapidly, bound gags with clothing, and executed headshots mercilessly. At least one victim was sexually assaulted, leaving crucial male DNA later preserved despite the fire. Shortly before midnight, a patrol officer spotted flames licking through the storefront, radioing a structure fire. Fire crews forced entry, knocked down the blaze, and discovered 4 bodies within the charred interior. 3 victims were found together, heavily charred and bound. A 4th lay separately with burns. Ballistics later showed .22 and .380 caliber weapons used. Arson likely aimed at destroying evidence. The back door appeared accessible, consistent with a rapid exit into the darkness behind the building. By dawn, 4 names would anchor Austin's grief: Eliza Thomas, Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers. Reporters converged, neighbors shivered, and investigators began a meticulous, years-long struggle against chaos and rumor. In those first hours, Austin police preserved DNA from a rape kit, a future cornerstone of truth. The city's question formed immediately, cavernous and unrelenting. Who could do this, and why? Detectives worked thousands of hours, chasing tips from credible observations to outright fabrications and attention seekers. Early attention fell on teens with petty records, including one later caught carrying a similar caliber gun. Interviews stretched into marathons, memories blurred. Detectives sought coherence within a cacophony of partial truths. Years passed, and a new team re-interrogated 4 young men: Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Forrest Wellborn. Under intense questioning, Springsteen and Scott confessed, each implicating the other, while Pierce and Wellborn did not confess. The confessions contained crime scene details, but critics argued such details can be inadvertently fed by interrogators. Prosecutors moved forward, and by 2001, both men faced juries under capital murder indictments. Springsteen received a death sentence, Scott life imprisonment, on the strength of their interlocking statements. Appeals exposed a constitutional fault line. Each trial used the other's confession without cross-examination, violating confrontation rights. In 2006 and 2007, key rulings unraveled the convictions, and both men eventually walked free. Crucially, emerging DNA showed male genetic material from the scene did not match any of the 4. The cases against Scott and Springsteen collapsed without physical evidence. Retrials were abandoned in 2009. Debate intensified over interrogation practices, with specific Austin cases spotlighting coerced confessions and systemic pressure. Families endured fresh grief, their decades of mourning compounded by uncertainty, legal turns, and lingering public suspicion. Detectives safeguarded preserved DNA and ballistics evidence, waiting for technology to catch up with truth. For years, rumors swirled about notorious criminals in Texas, yet definitive links kept evaporating. The question endured with sharpened edges. If not them, then who had orchestrated this ruthless crime? In the background, national databases, genetic genealogy, and upgraded ballistics quietly transformed cold case possibilities. By the mid-2020s, a forensic convergence finally surfaced, name echoing across multiple states and crimes. Authorities publicly announced a major breakthrough, hinting at closure once thought forever beyond reach. Detectives rebuilt the case in 1999, re-interviewing 4 previously flagged youths under renewed scrutiny. Those names were Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellborn, each questioned extensively.
Springsteen and Scott ultimately confessed, each implicating the other. Pierce and Wellborn did not confess.
The confessions moved prosecutors to charge all 4 in 1999, setting a controversial legal trajectory. Springsteen was tried in 2001 and sentenced to death. Scott followed in 2002, receiving life. But both convictions rested heavily on interlocking statements, with scant physical evidence anchoring the accusations. Appellate courts later ruled the trials violated confrontation rights by using non-testifying co-defendants' statements. Springsteen's conviction was overturned in 2006. Scott's followed in 2007, unraveling the prosecution's core narrative. By 2009, prosecutors abandoned retrials after DNA indicated an unknown male, excluding all 4 men. Years later, discussions of interrogation pressure, contamination risk, and false confession psychology intensified locally. Families confronted a double burden, mourning their daughters while watching prosecutions collapse, reopening old wounds publicly. Public anger often fixed on the question, if not them, who controlled that terrible scene? Meanwhile, preserved DNA from sexual assault kits remained in secure storage, integrity monitored for future testing. Forensic labs would eventually gain new tools, Y-STR expansion, improved STR, and database connectivity to revisit cold evidence. These upgrades reflected a national shift. Cold cases solved through iterative retesting and integrated intelligence. What remained was patient, methodical work, testing, comparing, eliminating, until disparate shards finally aligned convincingly. The truth would surface not from a room of hunches, but from molecules and metals. Early Y-STR testing produced a limited 16-marker male profile, informative yet insufficiently discriminating for identity. As technology matured, retesting expanded the Y-STR profile to 27 markers, strengthening investigative powers substantially. Detectives requested manual Y-STR searches from labs nationwide, leveraging non-CODIS repositories to chase rare profiles. A breakthrough arrived from South Carolina, a complete Y-STR match to a 1990 Greenville homicide. That 1990 case had already been associated through genealogy and exhumation with Robert Eugene Brasher's. Investigators then compared Austin's Y-STR to the South Carolina profile, confirming a rare concordant fingerprint. Population estimates showed the matched Y-STR could appear in a small fraction of the population. Even so, the match focused inquiry sharply toward Brasher's, already linked to multi-state violent offenses. Austin's preserved evidence also held additional Y-STR signals consistent across 3 victims' sexual assault kits. The lab work underscored limits. Y-STR traces paternal lines, and requires careful statistical interpretation, always. To cross the final bridge, investigators needed direct autosomal STR from crime evidence for comparison. Analysts recovered an autosomal STR profile beneath Amy Ayer's fingernails, enabling one-to-one comparison conclusively. That STR profile matched Brasher's at roughly 2.5 million to 1 odds, the decisive biological bridge to Austin. For families, those numbers translated into something human. Resistance mattered, evidence endured, and truth persisted. This was not myth or rumor. It was careful science layered across decades of disciplined custody. The forensic arc bent toward one name repeatedly. Investigators resubmitted a .380 cartridge casing from Austin into today's upgraded ballistic imaging ecosystem. NIBIN returned a presumptive correlation to a 1998 unsolved Kentucky homicide, unlocking a critical bridge. Toolmark examiners then pursued a one-to-one comparison to confirm whether the same gun fired both. Historically, Austin evidence also involved .22 projectiles. Subsequent ballistic work centered on the .380 linkage. As the team consulted allied agencies, pattern similarities emerged across Missouri, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Those other cases were already tied to Brasher's by DNA and ballistics years before Austin's breakthrough. Critically, records showed Brasher's stopped 2 days after Austin at a West Texas checkpoint. He possessed an AMT-380 backup pistol, same make and model identified in Austin ballistic analysis. Ballistics later linked that pistol model to crimes where Brasher's operated. Official comparisons continued methodically. This investigatory lattice, NIBIN clues, tool marks, travel logs, meshed coherently with the genetic story emerging. A story of metals and molecules was replacing decades of speculation and contentious confession analysis. For public understanding, the distinction mattered. Ballistics suggest a gun. DNA can indicate a person. Together, they placed Brasher's within reach of Austin, temporally and forensically, across multiple corroborative channels. The case's center of gravity shifted decisively toward a suspect long beyond prosecution, but not beyond truth. Born in 1958, Brasher's built a criminal resume spanning states, identities, and escalating violent behavior. He pled to homicide and aggravated battery in 1985, later paroled, then drifted across southern corridors. Investigators later learned he sometimes faked his death and used family-derived names to obscure tracks. His method often included binding with clothing, sexual assault, and gunshots to the head. Cold, controlled violence. Surviving victims reported he typically acted alone, capable of dominating multiple victims during home invasions. 2 days after Austin, Border Patrol stopped him near El Paso with a stolen car and .380. The same AMT .380 model appeared again at his death, a 1999 Missouri standoff suicide. Years after, genealogy and exhumation would explicitly tie Brasher's remains to multi-state cases already suspected. Austin's new testing then brought Ayer's fingernail STR into alignment with Brasher's post-mortem reference. The city also confirmed no physical evidence tying the previously accused four to the scene. Nor did any evidence connect those men to Brasher's. Their narratives diverged entirely under scrutiny. The emerging consensus from labs and detectives was straightforward. One offender, experienced, mobile, opportunistic. For families, this portrait reframed the unimaginable as a pattern. Horrific, methodical, yet finally identifiable. Austin's mystery began contending with an answer, one indifferent to court calendars, but bound by science. Autosomal STR compares many independent loci across the genome, producing highly individual discriminating power. From Y-STR's fingernails, analysts obtained an interpretable STR profile despite degradation and mixture challenges. Compared directly to Brasher's reference, the profile matched within about 1 in 2.5 million random match odds. This figure expresses rarity within relevant populations, not absolute certainty, but weighty evidential significance. In parallel, Y-STR signals across 3 victims' kits converged on Brasher's paternal line profile repeatedly. Together, autosomal STR and Y-STR form complementary layers, individual identification and lineage corroboration, respectively. Courts often privilege autosomal STR for person-level attribution. Investigators used Y-STR to focus efficiently. Ballistics linkages then added a third independent pillar, anchoring weapon history alongside biological inference. Investigators emphasized pending formal one-to-one ballistics reports even as NIBIN correlations guided direction. APD publicly framed conclusions carefully. Evidence points to Brasher's, no physical link to prior arrestees. For families, the science clarified agency. Amy fought, leaving DNA that would one day speak loudly. The city heard that voice at last, quantified, repeatable, independently reviewed, cutting through decades of contradictory noise. For 30-plus years, families balanced grief with advocacy, while rumors and reversals magnified their pain. The 2009 dismissals brought complicated relief, but also fear that justice might never truly arrive. With the 2025 announcement, relatives described relief tempered by the impossibility of courtroom accountability. They asked for formal exonerations and compensation reconsideration for those wrongfully convicted years earlier. Austin police publicly acknowledged no physical evidence linked the previously accused to the crime scene. Advocates pushed interrogation reforms, citing the case as a cautionary tale about confession-centric approaches. Community memorials reframed remembrance from unanswered horror toward hard-won, evidence-based understanding. Media interest surged again, but authorities emphasized verified science over sensational speculation and mythology. For many, closure meant finally knowing who and how, though not always exactly why, that night unfolded. Families described their daughters beyond headlines, students, friends, sisters, reclaiming identities eclipsed by the case. In vigils and living rooms, the city held both justice and sorrow, neither canceling the other. Press briefings detailed stepwise forensics, Y-strand expansion, manual search, NIBIN, and direct STR confirmation. National outlets highlighted the integrated toolkit that finally cracked Austin's most painful cold case. 48 Hours and local stations summarized the Kentucky casing link and Ayer's crucial fingernail evidence. Reports emphasized Brasher's 1999 suicide in Missouri, foreclosing prosecution, yet not preventing forensic resolution. Coverage reiterated earlier wrongful convictions, reversals, and final dismissals as context, not competing narratives. Journalists explained statistical cautions, Y-STR lineage limits versus autosomal STR's person-level identifying capacity. Authorities noted some formal ballistics confirmations remained pending, even as investigative confidence solidified. The public learned Brasher's was stopped 2 days post-murders with the relevant AMT.380. This transparency, methods, limits, next steps, replaced speculation with falsifiable, reviewable, documented processes. Ultimately, communication mirrored the investigation itself. deliberate, evidence first, intolerant of narrative shortcuts or theater. In the end, here are some lessons and legacy from this case. First, preserve broadly, test iteratively. Careful storage allowed modern science to interrogate decades-old traces successfully. Second, integrate disciplines. Ballistics, STR, Y-STR, and genealogy must converse, not operate in silos. Third, constrain confession-centric cases. Interrogation reforms and corroboration thresholds protect truth and prevent miscarriages. Fourth, communicate uncertainty honestly. Pending toolmark reports and lineage limits were disclosed without hedging. Fifth, honor victims beyond cases. Families deserve stories of lives lived, not only crimes endured. Practically, Austin's resolution invites audits of other cold cases where evidence sits awaiting new techniques. Nationally, the case reinforces building capacity for IgG Y-STR searches and cross-state liaison work. For those once accused, official findings separating them from the scene warrant careful legal reconsiderations. For the community, truth arrived as a mosaic, each tile verifiable, finally forming a coherent picture. The ending is not triumphalist. It is sober, earned, and anchored in verifiable evidence. And so an Austinites in 1991 finds its answer in 2025. Measured, scientific, humane.